Welcome everyone to the Hochschule Lucerne. This is a design management bachelor program. Today we are extremely lucky because we have Nora Bateson with us, sharing her knowledge. Nora is an award-winning filmmaker. Hopefully you saw the film about an ecology of mind. She's also a research designer, writer, educator, international lecturer, as well as the president of the International Basin Institute based in Sweden. This webinar is part of the lecture series that we are having, and this month or this term, we have a women's series. So Nora, when you are ready, the floor is all yours. You can start sharing screen if you need to. And okay. Thank you.
All right. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with you. And before we dive into screen sharing and that whole mess of technology, I just wanted to start with a little bit of history to let you know sort of where I'm coming from, as they say. But that's another way of saying what's the context, and I think that's an important piece of what all of this is about today. So I would like to invite you back. Before my father, Gregory Bateson's work, which some of you may be familiar with, and hopefully you're getting a chance to read some of that. It's not easy work, but before my father did his work, his father was actually at the University of Cambridge, and at Cambridge University rather, and he was in the biology department. In the biology department, William Bateson was studying how organisms change. And he was studying how they change through inheritance and over generations, this intergenerational shift. And what he was actually seeing was that organisms don't just change by themselves. They change in relationship to other organisms. So this was throwing a bit of a wrench in the ideas of evolution being a linear progression. And he was asking contextual questions. Now, one thing that's interesting about my grandfather is that he's the guy who actually coined the term genetics. That's his word. He brought that word into the world. And he brought that word into the world in 1905. And at that time in history, something that we don't speak of very often, at that time in history, the darling of science was eugenics. That was the darling of science. And in the same way that right now people are studying viruses, and before that we were studying neuroscience was all the rage, and before that the study of the genome and DNA was all the rage, right? Science and culture are interlocked. And this is something we must never forget. The questions that are being asked and explored in scientific realms are usually generated in culture. So in that time, eugenics was the sweetheart of science. Now, this was not just true at Cambridge, it was true in Sweden, it was true in the United States, it was true all over Europe, it was true even in Asia. So all the science money was going into eugenics. And at that time, now remember, it's still several decades before Hitler is going to use eugenics in the way he used it. So this is far before that happened. And what happened was that people thought that if you want to improve society, what you have to do is improve the individuals. Okay, they thought that this was an altruistic, benevolent work. How do you make a better society? You make better individuals. So they took it upon themselves to figure out how to do that. And I think most of you know the history that happened from there was horrendous. They measured people, they set up various sorts of graphs and stipulations for what was normal. Now, what happens when you set up the description of what is normal is that you also delineate what is not normal, what's abnormal. And those things that were abnormal needed to be adjusted, fixed, trimmed, whatever, by chemical or genetic change to fit in or to be excluded entirely. So I think you can start to feel the horror here, right? And so my grandfather in that time was one of the very few people who was fighting eugenics. He said, this is wrong. In 1905, 1906, 1910, he was fighting hard. This must be stopped. This is a vulgarity. This is a violence. This must be stopped. But he lost that. As you know, history tells us the story. I wanted to start with that because I think it's really easy to fall into the industrial dream. And the industrial dream tells us that there's going to be a linear progression, that you can isolate one organism or one person's experience at a time. The industrial dream is about having parts that fit, that work together, that produce. And this industrial dream started, you know, I don't know really exactly when it started, but it was in full bloom by the mid-1800s. Eugenics, statistics, the beginning of psychology, the word economics was formed in this time, the basis of an education system. Okay, so the education system starts to mirror the factory. The health system mirrors the factory. The economics mirrors the factory. The family even begins to mirror the factory. And what we start to talk about is functional or dysfunctional families, how to get people into that normal bracket if they happen to be outside of it, becomes a matter of the shared collective economic productivity of the society, okay? So this permeated absolutely everything from even language, right? So prior to this period of time in a lot of European languages and certainly in English, you might say, I'm going to market and buying bread. Okay, I'm going outside and picking peaches. I'm going to school and learning to read. Okay, when the factory takes hold, there is a shift, and even that teeny little joiner word there tells you so much about what changed. And in that time, it went from I'm going to market and buying bread to I'm going to market to buy bread. And do you see what happened in that one tiny little spot? Now, when I do something, I'm doing it to get this linear response, to achieve that piece. Okay, I'm doing it to. I'm going to market to buy bread. Now, the obvious continuance of that is, how can I get better bread faster, more? Okay, if it's linear, if it's about going to market to buy bread, then we should get there faster, buy more bread, cheaper, faster, better, etc. Let's optimize it. Prior to that, it was, I'm going to market, and here's a whole bunch of possibilities that can take place. And I'm buying bread. Oh, what kind of bread? And is the bread person here? And maybe there's no bread. And if I came home with no bread, I went to market to buy bread, and bought bread, and didn't buy bread, but it didn't matter. All right. If you go to market to buy bread and you didn't buy any bread, you failed. You failed. So there's a completely different way of being in the world that starts to occur in this industrial dream. Eugenics plays exactly into it. What are we going to do? We're going to optimize people. We're going to make them better, faster, smarter. We're going to measure how smart they are with IQ tests. That's a eugenics piece. We're going to diagnose them. We're going to measure. We're going to fix them. If they're broken, we'll squish them in. We'll make them fit. Okay. Now, the reason I'm starting with this is because this thinking is so permeated into our language, our understanding of most of our world, what it means to graduate school, what it means to make something, what it means to be an individual, right, is boiled into this. So if we really are thinking about taking responsibility in any way for the kind of destructiveness that we're looking at in most aspects of our lives right now, we're going to have to actually approach very differently. So being sensitive and sensitized to the characteristics, the rhythms, the logic of industrialism is so important. I really don't think I can stress that enough. I know so many people who are desperately trying to be change makers, and everything they do to make change perpetuates the same problem because the thinking is the same. And what they want to do is to do this to make change. And as long as we're in that industrial thinking, we're going to keep making industrial problems. So that one little piece, to and, right? So I want to make art and see how it goes out in the world, see how people respond to it. I want to feed my children good food and tend to their health. Okay, not two. The second you go there, you're down the rabbit hole. So, so William was fighting, and he was fighting hard, and he lost. But he got it. He understood, and he was a punk rocker. I mean, you cannot imagine the way this guy was actually willing to fight the establishment. And he had courage. No, that's the wrong thing to say. He didn't have courage. He had conviction. And the courage was sort of a side effect of the conviction. But, he was actually offered knighthood by the King of England, and he wrote him a letter and said, no, thank you, I can't accept. He turned it down, and he turned it down because he didn't want his work to be brought into the academy and have the academy then bring it into the political system, the economic system, the journalism, etc. He saw that the entirety of the establishment, in this moment. Okay, look at the timing of this. Right, we're coming right up into where fascism is about to take hold, and William saw it coming, and he didn't want anything to do with it. He fought as hard as he could, and then he stepped out of that and continued doing his research. Left Cambridge and started a new laboratory up in Norwich and filled it full of women over 50 because they could see the world differently. And for 100 years, he was the guy that got it wrong. He was shunned. He was shamed. His name was not in the history books. And then about 10 years ago, they realized, oh, William was the one who got it right. So this was the environment that my dad grew up in. And he went on to we went to New Guinea. Wait, I want to show you this cool artifact real quick. All right, I'm going to share screen now. All righty. So look at this. Can you read this on your screen? Okay, so 1888. All right, William Bateson writes a letter to his sister. Now, some people write to their sister and they talk about the holidays and how the weather is, but nope. William writes to his sister and he says, "My brain boils with evolution. It's becoming a perfect nightmare to me. I believe now that it is an axiomatic truth that no variation, however small, can occur in any part without other variation occurring in other parts." Hold on. Or rather, that no system in which a variation of one part had occurred without such correlated variations in all other parts could continue to be a system. Okay, 1888, you guys, 1888. This follows from what one knows of the nature of an individual, whatever that may be. Now, the fact that he's saying this in this paragraph is really interesting because this is the moment when the notion of the individual being that part of society that must be fixed is coming into play. Okay, so this idea that you can fix the parts, if you want to fix something, you fix the parts. Well, that works with a pickup truck. It works with your laptop. It does not have anything to do with how life is, right? Because if then it's true that no variation could occur if it were not arranged that other variations should occur in correlation with it in all parts, all these correlated variations are dictated by the initial variation acting as an environmental change. Therefore, the occurrence of any variation in a system is proof that all parts have the power of changing with environmental change and must, of necessity, do so. That's pretty amazing what he's got going there. And it's amazing because this becomes the way in which his research becomes a research not necessarily of how there is linear change in an organism, but how to study environmental, contextual, multi-organism evolutionary processes. Okay, symbiosis comes out of this. All sorts of things are coming into Western science now. Mycelial, you're very familiar with that. It's, all kinds of things were coming through that now, but they were not for a long, 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 long time. Of course, ancient cultures around the world already knew all of this, but they didn't have the language of the scientific academy to give it breath in this culture. So Gregory, my dad, came along and he actually, he began to study in New Guinea. And he met Margaret Mead there, and they were 25 years old. Okay, this is the very beginning of anthropology. And what they were really interested in was stopping fascism. That's what they were interested in. It was the year 1929, 1930, and they could feel, at that time, the United States had an immigration program that said that only people from Northern Europe could come in. Eugenics was everywhere. And they were fighting it. And if you go to the Library of Congress, you will find that the early systems theory people who would later in the 1950s come up with cybernetics and the Macy conferences, those people, when they were young, they were passionate, they were afraid for their future, and they were asking the question, how do we fight fascism? And because when you fight fascism, it fights back, right? And when you don't fight fascism, it carries on. So what do you do with fascism? And I think this is a question a lot of us are asking right now, actually. So what they thought was this: if we could create a science that could study how things were coming together, that would give us a completely different way of understanding our world. And their hope was that that kind of understanding that was coming through how these organisms and processes were interdependent, that this would actually be the premises of a culture that would be immune to the kind of thinking that is needed to produce fascism. If you objectify anything in a living system, if you cut it away from its other relational processes and you examine that thing out of context, what you will do is actually create the justification for the exploitation of that thing, whether it is an organism, a person, a culture, a nation, a continent. When you break the perception of the relational processes, you allow for the exploitation. So that's what they were fighting. And these letters, they're in the Library of Congress. They're so wonderful and heartbreaking. They don't know what the hell they're talking about yet. They don't have the language of cybernetics or systems theory yet. They're just all over the place, but they care deeply. And I wanted to share that with you because it's easy to get dazzled by the beautiful intellectual processes and incredible material in systems theory, complexity theory, cybernetics, and so on. But remember where it started, in the passionate young people trying to stop fascism. All right, I'm going to go back to sharing screen for a second. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is actually blow your mind. So my dad once said this. In some way he said it. I think the quote is wrong, that's moving around in the world, but whatever. Essentially this, that the major problems in the world are the difference between how nature works and how people think. Okay? And this is an invitation to begin to perceive the world in another way. How does a meadow think? How does a meadow learn? Okay, a meadow is not just one organism, but you know what? Neither are you. You are something like 400 trillion organisms. And the evolution of all of those organisms with so many other trillions of organisms, right? Where's the edge of you? How might we begin to approach the world that we're living in more like a meadow and less like an industrialist, okay? So I want to introduce you to this concept, abductive process. I'm not going to go too deeply into it. I just want you to get it in your belly. So there's this guy, Charles Saunders Peirce, who you may have studied. This is his terminology. And the idea is that one context describes another. Okay, let's just let that sit there. Now I'm going to just ask you to look at these organisms here, super amazing organisms, and you may notice that they have eyes that look like predatory birds, owls or eagles or something of the sort, right? Okay. Now these birds are not camouflaging. These moths, rather, are not camouflaging. What are they doing? So it's fascinating because imagine that in the development of the physiology of these organisms, there is a depiction of, now listen, it's not their predators that this is the depiction of, it's their predators' predators. So these birds of prey that are depicted are the predators of the predators that want to eat these moths. All right, so in cybernetics, we call that second order. It's a second order description of a contextual relationship. That's incredible. Okay, so nature doesn't play around at first order. You can't do systemic work at first order. What do I mean by that? I mean, if I take this book and I smack it, it smacks. Okay, that's physics. If I have my husband and I smack him, he might lean back a little bit, but what happens after that is relational. How he feels about me, how he thinks about me, what my kids think about me, how the law thinks about me, right? So there's all these other relational processes that are going to take place. The slap is like, that's, that happened, but that's not what happened. What happened is in the relational process, okay? So it's the same sort of thing you're seeing here. Here's some more. So if you start to look at this abductive process, the way in which all of us, okay, are in some way a description of our contexts, that one context is describing another. All right, so where is the edge of the fox? I mean, not just where's the edge of him, but where is the edge of the fox? Does the fox end at his fur, or is the tundra part of the description of the fox, and the fox is a description of the tundra? All the way down into their physiological processes. Okay, this stick bug. The stick bug. Where's the edge of the stick bug? Where's the edge of this frog that is in a description of the forest floor, not just as the forest floor, but as the forest floor as it's decomposing? This leaf gecko. Is the gecko an expression of the tree? Abductive process is this way in which different aspects are actually describing each other. Okay, so we might like to say, for example, is that not the coolest, right? That's such an amazing set of slides. We might like to say, for example, that we want to change the health system, okay? There's something wrong with the health system. We have to change the health system. But the health system is not the health system. The health system is the economic system. The health system is the family. The health system is the culture. The health system is history. The health system is technology. And if you try to change the health system, you're not going to get anywhere. Because what's holding the health system in place is all those other relationships. All right? What's holding the stick bug in its configuration is all those other relationships to the other organisms. The health system is a description of the economic system. It's a description of the family, a description of the culture. It's a description of technology and history, right? If you start to look at this with an abductive eye, your brain's going to start boiling with evolution. It's because where does it start and stop? Now, the way that we've been trained to look at the world is to tear it up into parts, and then we study the parts, try to improve the parts to create an improvement of our ideas, okay? So if you want to look at this Picasso of an ostrich, and you say, oh, for God's sakes, let's fix this up. So let's take all the pieces of this picture and make them in some kind of order so that we can understand the painting. Let's take all those straight lines and put them here, and we'll put these wiggly lines in a row because they're sort of the same. We'll take these hoopty ones, we'll just stack those in a pile. All right, essentially, this is statistics. And where did the ostrich go? Okay, the ostrich is not in any of the lines. The ostrich is in the way the different lines express and make gesture of the movement that is actually implied completely in another context of life, of how it feels to run. It's somewhere in your body. This breakdown down here, which is essentially a reductionism of the painting, is gone. It's gone. So the mistakes that are getting made again and again are that we take life, we break it into pieces, and we try to fix the parts. But they're totally incoherent, aren't they? Completely incoherent. So if you look at this Matisse, okay, which has been sorted out by sizing and of height of the blue blobs. Okay, let's just put them in a descending order of height. If you look at the blue blobs, you are not going to be able to sense that stretch in the person's lower back that is implicated by the movement of that elbow and the twisting of the knee, right? You can, where does this picture happen? It's kind of somewhere in the lower back that isn't even in the picture. When a Japanese flower arranger makes an ikebana flower arrangement, there's the one piece goes this way and one is this way and one is down here. And what they are articulating has nothing to do with each flower. It has to do with how they are telling each other's stories. How are the organisms or the aspects of those paintings or those lines or those creatures in those trees, how are they telling each other's stories? You see, the major problems in the world are the difference between how nature works and how people think. And if we come in with that industrial mindset, we come in and we break it. And then we try to fix it like it was a pickup truck, right? If you have a pickup truck, you can lift up the hood and you can pull off the distributor cap and you can change the spark plugs. But you can't do that with a family. You can't just change the children out, change the parents out. We have made compensations for each other. We move together. We learn together. I might learn to withhold my emotional expression because in my family, that's how you do it. I am learning to be in my world. And that's a mutual learning. My parents and my siblings, they're learning to be in their world too. So your brain starts to boil with evolution. I'm noticing that we're supposed to actually end in some amount of minutes, but can I go just a little further? Are you guys doing okay? Yes. Are you having fun? Okay, good. So I want to introduce you to a word that is my dad's word. Hold on, let me share screen. So this is my father's word, and it's a good one. Transcontextual. Now, transcontextual, I find to be a much better word than transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary, because what I started to realize, in fact, is that the world is not made of disciplines. It's actually made of context, and there's a whole lot of things happening in the world that are not represented in any kind of discipline of the academy. We must go beyond that. This word transcontextual I was just sort of getting there with you, and it's pointing to those ways in which multiple contexts are taking place simultaneously in any living system. He says, let me coin the word transcontextual. As a general term for this genus of syndromes, it seems that both those whose life is enriched by transcontextual gifts and those who are impoverished by transcontextual confusions are alike in one respect. For them, there's often a double take, a falling leaf, the greeting of a friend, or a primrose by the river's brim is not just that and nothing more. Exogenous experience may be framed in the context of dream, and internal thought may be projected into the context of the external world, and so on. For all this, we seek a partial explanation in learning and experience. Okay. Let's unpack that a little. My dad's writing is pretty hard, actually. So a falling leaf. It's not just that and nothing more. You might see a falling leaf and it might be a melancholy for you. It might say, oh, this day has a sorrow to it. It might be the beginning of autumn, and you might notice the seasons are changing. There might be a kid up in the tree that's wiggling around and the leaves are falling. It may be that there's not enough nourishment and water in the soil and the tree is actually dying. It's not just that and nothing more, right? So when you are perceiving anything, you are not just perceiving that thing you think you're perceiving. You're perceiving a whole world around it. Okay, the greeting of a friend. Hey, friend. And maybe that person usually walks across the street and wraps their arms around you. And when they don't walk across the street and they say, hey, friend, from across the way, there's a whole lot of different meaning there. Are they sick? Are they lonely? Is something wrong? Have you offended them? Are they in a hurry? What's going on? It's not just that and nothing more. Maybe it's the first time they've greeted you in 10 years because it's been a feud. It's not just a greeting. It's a whole shift of the relationship, right? So those things that we think we're talking about, they are generally not just that and nothing more. right? So when we try to objectify, to pull something out of its transcontextual process, whether it's me or you or a leaf or a friend's greeting, we are going to obscure and to make vulnerable our processes of perception. Transcontextual. So I am transcontextual. You are transcontextual. I'm a mom. I'm a daughter. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a writer. I'm 400 trillion organisms. I'm a person living in Sweden, but I'm clearly not Swedish. I am my generation. I'm a woman. I am my tax ID number. I am my health. I am the history of my heartbreaks and my experience of learning in this world. I'm my education. So in each of those contexts, you could perceive me being in communication and relationship with my world in a very different way. As a student, I am, doing particular kinds of communication, not the same as how I am with my kids, not the same as how I am with you right now, not the same as how my trillions of organisms are in relationship with each other. These are different kinds of communication, different kinds of relationships, taking place in different timelines, different rhythms, different textures of communication. But I'm an ecology of all of those transcontextual processes. Every living system is at every order of scale. So, what is information? What is information? If we are actually looking at how all of these things are changing each other, what are we going to do with the fact, what is information? How do we study the tree and study the stick bug without having a study of the stick bug and a study of the tree? When, right, like the Matisse painting or the Picasso, we need to study how they are in relationship. How do we get that information that is the information of not just the multiple, right? We have this thing about listing the stakeholders. Nonsense. You do not need a bigger spreadsheet. It won't give you any systemic information. The systemic information is in the relationships between the stakeholders. So piping in more and more decontextualized information from lots of different directions does not make a context. All right, what it gives you is something very much like what happened to that ostrich picture. A bunch of things that are pulled out of context, pulled out of meaning, pulled out of their relationships. So from the 1600s on, I'm going to stop in 2 minutes now. We had the scientific method, and the scientific method was fantastic because it was a way of getting information and validating it and having it not be susceptible to the whims of the church or the king. Right? You had to prove it, you had to measure it, you had to do the same research in 2 different places and get the same results and show that it was empirically true. But if you try to do that with a complex system, it's going to be a nightmare. Because imagine your own family. Okay? You can't study one member of a family and make any sense of the family. And if you ask my kids who I am, they'll say one thing. If you ask my mother, she'll say another. If you ask my husband, he'll say something different. And if you ask any of them tomorrow, they'll say something different still. And if you ask each them in different order, right? If my mother and my children are sitting together and you ask them, they'll say different things than they would say if they were with other people. So where's the information? In a complex system, in a living system, the information is changing. It's alive. Now, the question around warm data, what warm data is all about is this exact thing. How do we study how these multiple contexts are working together, shifting each other, how your story changes my story? And can we actually tend to the livingness of our living world if the information we're using is not alive? We need to become familiar with the very uncomfortable new sort of species of information that is actually a living thing itself. If we want to respond to life, we need life. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I know you must have questions and we don't have much time left. So, I have to show you the last slide because it's kind of what the whole thing is about. Sorry. It's basically just, let's see, is it this one? No. Is it this one? No, sorry. No. No. Oh, crime. I can't see these things right now. There. Okay. Here we go. There. So warm data can be defined as information that is alive, or transcontextual information about the interrelationships that integrate a complex system. Okay. Got it? Good? Fine.
Well, do you have questions? You are processing. Okay, I do have a question.
Oh, good. Okay.
So we are not you. We didn't have your education. You have a special family history that helped you to learn to see things differently. You were not always in school. Most of us were always in school. So in that industrial things, you want the Pink Floyd school, right? So how do we learn? How do we unlearn? How do we learn to see the relationship? Because it is difficult to see the pattern in the relationship, particularly because there is no one relationship. And as you said, it's always changing.
Right.
So by the moment you say, oh, I got it, it's this. It's no longer this, it's something else.
Right.
So how do we learn?
Well, I mean, the thing is, you're already doing it. You live in a body that is a complex system. You're sitting here, you're making words while you're digesting your lunch, while you're teaching a class, while you're communicating with me. The thing is just to notice it. It's already there. There's really nothing to go find. It's all here. If you take one step into a forest, you will see all of these different organisms. But our training has been to think of causality and to think of, oh no, everything's going to ring now.
What happened?
There we go. Sorry. My phone started ringing on all my devices. So okay, so you look at a deer in the forest, okay? And the deer's antlers. Just one part of one animal. The deer's antlers are there for protection from other deers and maybe a lion or something. The deer's antlers have this fuzz in them. And in the fuzz, these tiny little flies live, and it's the only place they live. When the deer rubs his antlers on the tree, it moves the bark into dust, and it makes it possible for particular insects to live in the bark. When the deer's antlers fall off the deer, they fall to the forest floor, and the creatures on the bottom of the forest floor, they eat the antlers, and they make a little home in the antlers. And when they poop, the poop goes into the soil, and it puts the calcium and the minerals into the soil that the bacteria need to produce the forest that the deer lives in. And every one of those other organisms is in, and that's just a few little versions of one part of one organism. Nature never, ever, ever does one thing at a time. Never. This is a completely trans-contextual relationship. This is ecology. This is what a meadow is doing. When you ask yourself, how is the meadow meadowing? It's lots of organisms shifting, moving, creating life together. But that's what they're doing. They're making vitality. And that's not something that happens at first order. All right? Like you want to grow a garden, you make a compost pile, but you don't eat the compost. Right? The compost does its thing in the soil produces things, then the seed, then the water, then the sun, then all the other things come together. And then there's the dinner, and at the dinner, there's a conversation. Okay? And in all of that, life is making life. Yeah. So don't worry about it. Just try not to break things.
Try my best.
Yeah, we all are. Trying not to break things. Yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts?
We have a question in the, I need my eyeglasses. In the Q&A, Hans Kaspar, who is one of our team members and teacher, says, why would we fix parts and not the pattern outside of technology? Referring to the current course we do in systemic thinking. Is repatterning what you mean when you speak about living information?
Okay, that's a tricky one. Be careful with pattern.
Okay.
Okay. The way that I will invite you to think about pattern is to think of it as a verb, not a noun. Okay, patterning. Things are patterning, and they are going to have to continue to shift in their fluidity. Okay, there is a fluid patterning. If the meadow is going to continue meadowing, there are things that will continue and there are things that will not continue. Any kind of continuance requires discontinuance. So if you go looking for a pattern, you're going to find yourself looking for the code, the hack, the key, the engineering blueprint. And that will mess up your thinking. Don't look for that. Feel the rhythm. Sense the tone. Find the atmosphere. What are the tonalities, the ecology of communication in the relationships? Right? So it's not a grid. It's not a pre-written, composition. It's changing, and it has to be able to change in improvisation. This is true of a family, a forest, an ocean, anything. So if you go looking for exact patterns, you're going to come in with eyes looking for some. The problem is you'll find them. That's the real danger. If you're looking for patterns, you'll find them. And then you're going to have your agency contingent upon those patterns that you have found. And that agency is going to be out of sync with the living processes that are taking place.
So be careful what you look for.
Careful what you look for. If you're looking for something static, you'll find it.
George is asking, how do we maintain autonomy when we are part of this huge system? How do we stay motivated to make positive changes if we are just a tiny actor?
Because life is beautiful. It's beautiful, and you're part of it. And I don't know. I mean, sometimes your autonomy is your autonomy, and sometimes it's actually not. And, you know, the ability to toggle between I am me and I am my contexts is a really important, it's a really important perception, right? It's that thing of being able to ask in every moment, am I perceiving the world, or am I perceiving my perception? And if you ask yourself that question, you get such an incredible insight into the ways in which your context has actually trained you to think and to perceive. And you get a little bit of leverage. You can play. That's the key word. Play with it then.
Playing, we like playing, dancing.
Yeah, playing is good. Yeah.
Noah, you have a question. You are muted. Feel free to talk. You are... Noah, can you hear us? No, Noah, are you there? Can you hear us? No? Can you write your question? No?
Hand is down.
How?
Okay, Noah, if you feel like it, you can pop it in the chat if you have a thought. Otherwise, don't worry.
Good. And Jorge, you have a question?
Yes. Hi, I'm Jorge, Nora.
Hi, Jorge. Nice to meet you.
Since you talked about patterns, I became curious about how do you interpret your father's sentence about the patterns that connect.
Yeah, and I'm the question, this quote you're talking about is, what are the patterns that connect the crab to the lobster, the orchid to the primrose, and all the four of them to you and you to me? Now, what's happening in that sentence is the patterns that connect. That's actually something that's in motion. Right? So what we're doing is we're perceiving something that's in motion. Those patterns are connecting us, connecting. So it's not static. We're not looking for the pattern that connects. It's a way of perceiving that's asking that question. What are the patterns that are that connect this?
Okay.
Right? Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Thank you.
And, yeah. And part of that is also the invitation to see the ways in which I am like an orchid or a crab or a lobster, and you. How are we all in relationship, and how do we connect? What is the you know, like the antlers are in connection, the patterns of connection that are in the way the antlers connect with that whole forest ecology. And every one of those organisms is changing, maybe fast, maybe slow, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, maybe in 3 million years, but they're changing. And this fluidity is going to get you out of the industrial blocks of causality. If you start, like I started a few years ago talking about systems, and I just changed all my vocabulary. And I only used words that were either liquid or gaseous or food, or because everything that had to do with building or with parts and wholes gave me this convenient hangover of having that sort of agency that allows me to move the parts and wholes in a different way. And the second I start to think of these things as completely intersteeped, okay, that's a good word, then you realize you can't get the grapes out of the wine, right? You're not going to change the grapes in the wine, are you? No. So that's exactly the sort of thinking that we get into with systemic change, is that kind of like, how are we going to change the education system? But the education system isn't in the education system. It's in the wine of our society, of our culture. It's steeped in every direction. So then you kind of have to ask another question. how do I enter? What do you do to allow the wine to shift? It's not, you can't get those grapes out. So how do you allow for that shift to be a totally different approach? And this, I think, is really important, because every time we go in and try to fix the parts, we're going to fall back in to the industrial thinking that's creating the disasters we're in to begin with. And it's not easy not to do that. In fact, your whole world will keep asking you to do so. And you'll only get paid if you can prove that you can. You can only get the funding for the project that shows the measurement of the outcome. What's the impact? What's the deliverable? Right? If you're doing real systemic work, you won't know. How would you know? Because the relationships are changing, relationships changing, relationships changing, relationships. So what you're doing is you're actually allowing for something that's going to, like the compost, keep making life. But you don't know where it's going to go. It's actually not up to you. Yeah. There's one more here?
Yes, I have a little question.
Oh, great.
Because you talked a lot about things that were from the retrospective and about things that change during time. So I was wondering, what importance does time have in all these processes, and how we could use it better, or not use, but make something out of it in all these.
Yeah, time is a really interesting thing. And we could spend another several hours talking about time. So I just would like to say that the second you add any kind of, if you have a model, you've made such a nice model of whatever it is you're studying, add time. And what happens to your model? It changes. So most models are going to have a problem because they don't hold time. They don't show the way time is going to make everything in there shift and move. Right? Norbert Wiener said the best model of a cat is a cat, preferably the same cat. For exactly this reason. I mean, models are wrong, but they can be useful. But we forget that they're wrong. But they can't hold time. And every organism is working in a different kind of time. A dragonfly has a different kind of time than a sequoia redwood. Every organism in your body is working in a different kind of time. Once I was with my daughter in the car, and she's found this Rihanna video, and the Rihanna video got 8 million something views in 2 hours. And she said, wow. And I thought she was thinking how popular Rihanna was, but she wasn't. What she was interested in was how 8 million people had an experience that was registered in this 5-minute video over the course of 2 hours. And she said, well, isn't it interesting? If there's 8 billion people here on this earth, then every minute is really 8 billion minutes. Every hour is really 8 billion hours. Every year is really 8 billion years. Time is interesting.
We have 2 more questions in the Q&A. It's Noah says, hello, sorry, wasn't working. I did not have a question, but thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and experience with us.
Oh, thank you, Nora.
And then Sean Kuhn says, not a question. I totally agree that we need to learn to regain the sensitivity of the contextual system thinking. Nevertheless, it is very abstract. Some tangible learning approaches could be looking at patterning, right? To understand the pattern as a verb is key.
Careful.
Okay.
Be careful with that. Just be careful. I mean, it's there, but what's really abstract is pulling things apart.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If you look at that picture of that ostrich and you look at the pieces of the picture, which one is abstract? The artwork or the torn apart piece? So somehow in our crazy world, we have in our head that that which is practical and not abstract is actually the thing that's been completely separated, disconnected, and decontextualized. So isn't that fascinating? That the part that's abstract is the living part, that's actually something that all the organisms that we live with are constantly in interaction with. And the part that seems to make sense is the part where it's all torn apart. So I would recommend, well, the warm data approach is really good. We do warm data labs, and I'd be happy to invite you guys to one of our online sessions if you want to join. I think that the way that we've been teaching systemic perception, and I myself have been part of this process, is that the system is over here. We're going to study the system over here. And there's a real mishap because it's not over there. There's no way for you to get out of it. And it's not a thing. It's alive with you. And so we have to be very, very careful of putting the system over there and mapping it out in Post-it notes and arrows and boxes. Because I don't have a single relationship in my life that looks like an arrow or a box. So the description of those relationships, the way, the tonality, what color are you drawing those relationships in? What shapes? How can you express what's actually in the relationship instead of just a line between parts, right? Okay, I have to show you guys this slide. I just have to. Just hold on 1 second. Let me get it for you, okay?
We can wait.
Okay. Okay. Just 1 second. I'm going to get the share screen going. Oy. Okay. Oh, that's my whole world. Isn't that great? There we go. Okay. You see that slide?
Yes.
All right. So take a look. Feel the industry. All right. The nodes that are connected, they are never so symmetrical. The way things are connected, it is never a line. Okay, this could be a map of a family, it could be a map of a school, it could be the way we think about interconnectedness of all sorts of aspects of society. But be super careful with that thinking, because this invites a particular agency. Okay, and it's an agency that's connected to the industrialism that's in this blueprint-like illustration. By contrast, okay, you see this insect here? The insect is in relationship to the log and the moss and the rotting leaf and the moisture in the forest, okay? Where's the edge of the insect? What is in the relationship between those organisms? How is the shape of the moss and the shape of the insect's foot showing a relationship? What about their sizes? What about their temperatures, their textures? The relationship between organisms looks nothing like this. So when we look at what our agency is, and we have this picture, you should right now feel a terrible clenching in your gut. Oh no, what am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to be a part of this? What am I supposed to do? What is the doing? Which, to your point about it being abstract, I get it, right? This is, whoa, everything I've learned about doing just got undone. Mm-hmm. Because what we're actually participating in is, again, the question of how do I come into relationship with these organisms so that their story changes my story changes their story. This abductive process is taking place. So it's a very, very different, substantially different, completely different approach to coming into a living system, where you're not coming in with a predetermined causation that you want to achieve, that you've envisioned. Because if you do that, you've already turned it into a linear process. You've hijacked the complexity. You've demolished the possibilities that could come from all these different directions. So thinking like a meadow, learning like a meadow, responding like a meadow, making life like a meadow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
You're so welcome. I was super hard on you guys today. You didn't get any breaks at all. But you know what? I think that's okay, because I think we need that now. You know, I can definitely play a softer tune for you and bring you gently into the world of warm data. But actually, let's just start with abductive process and look at those moths, okay? When you get lost, think about those moths. Look at yourself right now. What you're wearing, the room you're in, the life you're in, how you hold your body, what shoes you're wearing, your language, and ask yourself, how am I a description of my contexts? Mm-hmm. You think you're so different from that stick bug in a tree. You're not so different. We are absolutely describing the world that we're in. So if we want to have the shift in our world, where is the shift in the description? Okay, I'll leave you with that. I was going to read you a poem. Do you want me to read you a poem? I'll read you a poem. It's about grapes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It's super short. See how short it is? Okay. It's called We Are Wine. Mm-hmm. Steeped in history, building a shadowy bouquet, unable to reassemble ourselves as grapes. We are wound into a richness we cannot undo. Beautiful still, and with a destiny that's vaguely related to vines. We still know water and wind. We know the stories of the keepers of the casks. We know versions of civilizations that sing. There is goodness. A look to the future of solutions is a potion table of bubbling mysteries, soaked in folded learnings, lost threads, unseen outcomes. We are not, and yet we are grapes, always. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you very much.